Life has a peculiar way of weaving unexpected paths. In the heart of America's farmland, where golden wheat fields stretch endlessly under vast blue skies, Tom Harrison's weathered hands barely kept his failing farm alive. Each sunrise brought mounting debts and fading hopes, until a muddy golden retriever limped onto his property one rainy morning. The simple act of kindness, feeding and caring for this lost companion, would spark a chain of events that no one could have predicted. When a sleek private jet touched down at the edge of his struggling farm 3 days later, Tom had no idea that returning a lost dog would lead to an encounter that would transform not just his land, but his heart. What happens when fate takes a simple farmer's compassion and turns it into the greatest love story of his life? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tom Harrison stood at the edge of his wheat field, watching the sunrise paint the morning sky in shades of amber and rose. The old farm sign creaked in the gentle breeze. Harrison Family Farm, Esther, 1952. Its weathered letters a testament to 3 generations of hard work and determination. His calloused fingers traced the edge of yet another overdue notice from the bank, the paper worn soft from being folded and unfolded countless times. The morning dew soaked through his worn work boots as he made his daily rounds. Every step carried the weight of responsibility, every glance at his fields a reminder of what he stood to lose. The combine harvester, a faithful companion for 20 years, sat silent and broken in the equipment shed. The repair bill alone would cost more than he'd made in the past 3 months. Inside his modest farmhouse kitchen, Tom settled into the chair his father had occupied for 40 years before him. Steam rose from his coffee mug, black and strong, just like Dad used to drink it. The stack of bills on the table had grown taller than the sugar bowl. Property taxes, equipment payments, seed costs, and that last failed attempt at modernizing. The irrigation system. "What would you do, Dad?" he whispered to the empty chair across the table. The morning sun filtered through faded gingham curtains his mother had sewn decades ago, casting familiar patterns on the worn linoleum floor. His father's voice seemed to echo in his memory. "A Harrison never gives up, son. We bend, but we don't break." The local paper lay open to the business section, where a glossy advertisement for corporate farming operations served as a bitter reminder of changing times. These days, family farms like his were becoming as rare as rain in August. The Petersons had sold out last spring, their land now part of some multinational agricultural corporation. The Whitakers were in talks to do the same. Tom's neighbor, old Jim Wheeler, had stopped by yesterday, concern etched deep in the lines around his eyes. "Times are changing, Tom. Maybe it's time to consider—" "I'm not selling, Jim," Tom had cut him off, perhaps too sharply. "This land isn't just dirt and crops. It's my family's legacy." Now, in the quiet of morning, those words echoed in his mind as he reviewed his dwindling options. The bank had made it clear. 3 more months of missed payments, and they'd initiate foreclosure proceedings. His savings had dried up faster than a puddle in July, spent on emergency repairs and trying to keep up with the rising costs of everything from fuel to fertilizer. The coffee grew cold as Tom pored over his ledger, the numbers refusing to add up to anything but disaster. He'd tried everything. Reduced labor costs by working longer hours himself, cut back on everything but essential equipment maintenance, even sold off his father's prized tractor collection piece by piece. But modern farming required modern solutions, and those came with modern price tags he simply couldn't afford. Through the kitchen window, he could see the old oak tree where his father had built him a swing as a boy. Now its branches stretched protective arms over the farmhouse, a silent guardian of Harrison family memories. Under that tree, he'd learned to read seed catalogues with his grandfather. He'd kissed Sarah Mitchell after the Harvest Festival when he was 17. He'd buried his dog Rex there 12 years ago. The morning was slipping away, and the fields wouldn't plough themselves. Tom folded the latest overdue notice and tucked it into his shirt pocket, right next to his heart. where it could keep company, with all his other worries. Outside, the wheat swayed in the breeze, green waves rolling across his land, their land. 3 generations of Harrisons had worked this soil, coaxed life from it, respected its seasons and moods. "We bend, but we don't break," he repeated his father's words like a prayer as he headed out to face another day of uncertainty. The sun climbed higher, promising another scorcher, but Tom Harrison had weather to endure, fields to tend, and a legacy to protect, even if he wasn't quite sure how he was going to manage it all. The rain came suddenly, as it often did in late spring, turning the morning's gentle mist into a determined downpour. Tom was checking the fence line along his eastern property when he first heard it. A soft whimper, nearly drowned out by the drumming rain. He might have missed it entirely, if not for a momentary lull in the storm. There, huddled against an old fence post, was a dog. Not just any dog, but a golden retriever, its usually bright coat muddied and matted. The animal lifted its head as Tom approached, revealing intelligent brown eyes and an expression that seemed almost apologetic for being caught in such a sorry state. "Hey there, friend," Tom said softly, crouching down despite the rain soaking through his jacket. The dog's tail made a tentative wag, spreading small arcs in the muddy puddle beneath it. As Tom moved closer, he noticed the dog was favoring its left front paw, holding it slightly off the ground. The animal wore a collar, expensive leather, he realized as he got closer, with a small gold tag that caught what little light filtered through the rain clouds. This was somebody's beloved pet, not some random stray. But out here, miles from the nearest town, it was clear the dog had wandered far from home. "Let's get you somewhere dry," Tom offered, reaching out slowly. The retriever didn't hesitate, pressing its wet head against his palm with immediate trust. Despite its injury, the dog managed to stand and follow Tom's gentle coaxing, limping beside him toward the farmhouse. In the mudroom, Tom found an old towel, threadbare but clean, and began drying the dog's coat. Under the mud and rain, the fur was a rich golden color that spoke of good breeding and careful grooming. The collar, now that he could see it clearly, was crafted from soft Italian leather with a diamond-studded tag that probably cost more than his monthly fuel budget. "Well, you're certainly not from around here," Tom mused, carefully cleaning the tag to read it. The engraving was elegant. Buddy on one side and on the other, an address in the city, some 40 miles away. But no phone number. The dog, Buddy, looked up at him with those soulful eyes, and Tom felt something shift in his chest. Here was another living creature needing help, and despite all his own troubles, he couldn't turn away. His father had taught him better than that. "All right, boy, let's take a look at that paw." Tom gently lifted the injured limb, finding no obvious breaks but significant swelling around the joint. A sprain, most likely, from whatever adventure had brought this. City dog, so far from home. In the kitchen, Tom fixed a bowl of water and found some leftover meatloaf in the fridge. Buddy accepted both with genteel manners that seemed almost comical in Tom's humble farm kitchen. The dog's presence filled an emptiness Tom hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. The house had been too quiet since Rex had passed. "You'll need to see a vet," Tom said, more to himself than the dog. The thought of the expense made him wince, but looking at those trusting eyes, he knew he'd find a way. Maybe Dr. Wilson would accept another IOU, add it to Tom's growing tab. The rain continued through the afternoon, drumming on the roof as Tom made his calls. The vet could see them tomorrow morning. The local sheriff had no reports of a missing golden retriever, but took down Tom's information. The address on the tag led to an exclusive, gated community in the city. He'd have to figure out how to get there once the dog was cleared by the vet. As evening settled in, Buddy had made himself at home, curled up on the old rug by the fireplace as if he'd always belonged there. Tom found himself talking to the dog as he prepared his simple dinner, sharing thoughts he usually kept to himself. "Guess we both had better days, huh?" He glanced at the stack of bills still waiting on the table. Buddy thumped his tail in response, offering canine sympathy without judgment. That night, As Tom lay in bed listening to the rain, he heard Buddy's gentle snoring from the kitchen, where he'd made the dog a bed from old blankets. The sound stirred memories of simpler times, when the farm's future had seemed secure and the world less complicated. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The vet bill, the mystery of returning Buddy to his wealthy owners, the ever-present pressure of the farm's finances. But for now, the simple act of helping another soul had given Tom's world a different kind of wealth, if only for a moment. The veterinary clinic's waiting room hadn't changed in 20 years. Same faded pictures of puppies and kittens, same worn chairs, same coffee maker that had probably been old when Tom was a boy. Dr. Wilson's silver hair had more grey now, but his kind eyes and steady hands remained constant as he examined Buddy's injured paw. Just a sprain, the vet confirmed, gentle fingers probing the swollen joint. He's lucky. Could have been much worse, wandering around out there. Probably got caught in something and twisted it trying to get free. He scratched behind Buddy's ears, earning a grateful tail wag. Good breeding, this one. Show quality, I'd say. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair, thinking of the empty checkbook in his pocket. What do I owe you, Doc? Dr. Wilson's eyes crinkled with understanding. Let's just add it to your tab, Tom. I know things are tight right now. He scribbled on his prescription pad. These anti-inflammatory meds will help with the swelling. Give them with food twice daily. The prescription alone cost more than Tom had budgeted for groceries that week. But watching Buddy's trusting eyes follow his movements, he knew he'd find a way to manage. The retriever had already worked his way into Tom's heart, filling an empty space he'd forgotten was there. Back at the farm, Tom's neighbor Emma Brooks stopped by with an old memory foam dog bed her golden retriever had outgrown. Thought your guest might appreciate it, she said, her eyes twinkling. News traveled fast in small farming communities. Martha at the diner asked me to bring you these too. She handed over a bag of beef bones, saved from yesterday's pot roast. Buddy settled into farm life with surprising ease for a dog clearly accustomed to luxury. He followed Tom on his morning rounds, limping less each day, his curiosity about farm life endearing. When Tom worked on the combine, Buddy lay nearby, head on paws, offering silent companionship that made the work feel lighter somehow. In the evenings, Tom found himself talking more than he had in years. "You're a good listener," he told Buddy, who sat attentively as Tom shared stories about the farm's better days, about his father's wisdom, about his hopes and fears for the future. The dog's presence seemed to make the old farmhouse feel like home again, rather than just a place full of worry and unpaid bills. But the diamond-studded tag on Buddy's collar gleamed in the lamplight, a constant reminder that this arrangement was temporary. Someone out there was probably worried sick about their missing pet. The thought of returning Buddy brought a heaviness to Tom's heart that surprised him. In just a few days, this dog had become more than just a lost pet. He was a friend. "Guess we'll have to find your family soon," Tom said one evening as Buddy rested his head on Tom's knee. The dog's brown eyes seemed to hold wisdom beyond simple animal intelligence, as if he understood everything. Tom wasn't saying about loneliness and responsibility and doing the right thing even when it hurt. Tom pulled out the tag again, studying the engraved address. The right thing to do was clear, even if it meant saying goodbye to the first real companionship he'd known in years. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Character is doing what's right, especially when no one's watching. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd make the drive into the city. The farm work would wait, and Buddy's family had waited long enough. The dog's paw was healing well, and Tom had done what he could to help. It was time to return this slice of unexpected joy to wherever it belonged, even if the thought left an ache in his chest he hadn't expected to feel. Tom's old pickup truck rumbled down the highway, Buddy sitting regally in the passenger seat as farms gave way to suburbs and eventually the looming skyline of the city. The hand-drawn map from the gas station attendant lay on the dash, a crude but necessary guide to finding the exclusive gated community listed on Buddy's tag. The retriever's ears perked up as they entered familiar territory, but he made no move to distance himself from Tom. Instead, he pressed closer, as if sensing Tom's growing discomfort with each mile that took them further from the familiar world of dirt roads and cornfields. "Your folks must be worried sick about you," Tom said, trying to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. The morning sun glinted off glass and steel towers that seemed to touch the clouds, making him feel smaller with each passing block. His dusty work boots and weathered John Deere cap felt increasingly out of place. Traffic thickened as they entered the city proper. Tom's calloused hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, navigating streets clogged with luxury cars that probably cost more than his entire farm. Buddy's tag had led them to Oakwood Heights, an area Tom had only heard about in news stories, about the wealthy and powerful who called it home. The guard at the community gate eyed Tom's mud-splattered truck with barely concealed suspicion. "Your business here, sir? Found this fellow out near my farm," Tom explained, gesturing to Buddy, who chose that moment to offer his most charming doggy smile. "Just returning him home?" The guard's demeanor shifted slightly at the sight of the golden retriever. A few calls later, they were waved through with directions to follow the winding drive past manicured lawns and fountains that probably used more water in a day than Tom's entire irrigation system. "Different world, isn't it, boy?" Tom murmured. As they passed houses that looked more like small hotels, Buddy whined softly, pressing his nose against Tom's arm. The dog's warmth offered comfort, even as Tom's throat tightened with the knowledge that their time together was coming to an end. Following the directions, they finally turned onto a private drive, marked by elegant stone pillars. The house at the end, if you could call something that size a house, sprawled across perfectly landscaped grounds. A fountain featuring prancing horses dominated the circular driveway where Tom carefully parked his truck, acutely aware of every speck of dust and mud on its paint. "Well, this explains the diamond collar," he said quietly, giving Buddy a final pat. The dog looked at him with those soulful eyes, and for a moment Tom considered turning around, driving back to the simple comfort of his farmhouse where Buddy had seemed so content. But that wasn't who Tom Harrison was. His father had raised him better than that. As they approached the imposing front door, Tom saw his reflection in the gleaming windows. Faded flannel shirt, worn jeans, lines of worry and work etched into his face. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly conscious of every detail that marked him as an outsider in this world of wealth and privilege. Buddy sat close to Tom's leg as he reached for the doorbell, its chimes echoing somewhere in the depths of the mansion. The dog's tail wagged, but there was a hesitation in it that Tom hadn't seen before, as if Buddy, too, felt the weight of this moment, this ending. "You'll be back where you belong," Tom whispered, more to himself than the dog. "Back to your real life." The sound of approaching footsteps from within made Tom straighten his shoulders, summoning the quiet dignity that generations of farmers had taught him to wear like armor. Whatever lay behind that door, he would face it with the same grace and integrity that had carried him through every other challenge life had thrown his way. Buddy pressed against his leg one last time as the door began to open, and Tom forced himself to smile, ready to hand over not just a lost pet, but a friend who had, however briefly, made his troubled world feel a little less lonely. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s, elegant even in casual clothes, her auburn hair swept back in a loose bun. For a moment, she seemed frozen in surprise at the sight of Tom, until Buddy gave an excited bark and pushed forward, tail wagging furiously. "Buddy!" Her composed facade cracked as she dropped to her knees, gathering the dog in her arms. "Oh my God, you're really here!" Tears gleamed in her green eyes as she buried her face in Buddy's fur, murmuring words of relief and joy. Tom stood awkwardly, wanting to step back but finding himself oddly rooted to the spot. The security cameras mounted discreetly above the door recorded this tableau. the wealthy woman in designer clothes, embracing her lost pet, while a weathered farmer watched from the periphery of a world he didn't belong in. When she finally looked up at Tom, her eyes were bright with gratitude. "Please come in," she said, rising gracefully. "I'm Catherine Reynolds. I can't believe you found him. We've been searching everywhere." Tom hesitated at the threshold. "No need, ma'am. Just wanted to make sure he got home safe." He touched the brim of his cap, preparing to retreat to his truck. "I insist," Catherine said, her tone gentle, but brooking no argument. "At least let me thank you properly." Buddy helped make the decision, trotting back to Tom and nudging his hand insistently. The interior of the house was everything Tom had expected and more. Soaring ceilings, artwork that probably cost more than his annual crop yield, furniture that looked too perfect to actually use. But Catherine led them to a surprisingly cozy kitchen, where a coffee maker that looked like it belonged in a spaceship hummed quietly. "How did you find him?" she asked, gesturing for Tom to sit at the marble-topped island while she prepared. In coffee, Buddy settled between them, clearly unwilling to let either human out of his sight. "He found me, actually," Tom replied, carefully placing his cap on his knee. "Out by my fence line, during that big storm last week. Had a hurt paw, so I had the vet take a look." Catherine's hands stilled on the coffee cups. "You took him to a vet?" Her voice held a note of surprise that made Tom's neck warm with embarrassment. "Seemed the right thing to do," he said simply. "Dr. Wilson's good with animals. Said it was just a sprain." The coffee she placed before him was darker than the rich soil of his best fields and probably cost more per pound than what he got for his wheat. "I've been going out of my mind," Catherine admitted, wrapping her hands around her own cup. "We've had search parties, posted rewards. Buddy's never run away before." Tom watched as the dog moved closer to Catherine while keeping his head near Tom's knee. "He's a good boy, smart. Made himself right at home on the farm." The farm. Catherine's interest sharpened. "You're a farmer?" "Third generation," Tom nodded. "Harrison family farm, out past Miller's Creek." Something shifted in Catherine's expression, recognition perhaps. "The organic wheat operation? I've heard of it. My company's been looking at agricultural investments in the area." Before Tom could process this unexpected connection, Buddy stretched out between them with a contented sigh, as if satisfied with how things were progressing. The dog's presence somehow made the vast gulf between their worlds seem less important. "I don't know how to thank you," Catherine said, her eyes meeting Tom's with genuine warmth. "Not just for finding him, but for taking care of him. Most people wouldn't have gone to such trouble." Tom shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "Like I said, seemed the right thing to do." He started to rise, feeling the weight of unfinished farm work waiting for him. "I should be getting back." "Wait," Catherine said quickly. "At least let me reimburse you for the vet bills. And of course, there should be a reward." "No need," Tom cut in, perhaps too firmly. He softened his tone. "Just glad he's home safe." Catherine studied him for a moment, as if seeing something that surprised her. Buddy looked between them, his tail thumping against the expensive tile floor. Outside, Tom's mud-splattered truck sat in stark contrast to the luxury vehicles in the circular drive, a visible reminder of the distance between their worlds. But, as he stood to leave, Catherine's next words would unknowingly set in motion changes neither of them could have predicted. "Mr. Harrison, before you go, I'd very much like to learn more about your farm." Catherine's business card sat on Tom's kitchen table like an artifact from another world. Heavy cream-colored stock, elegant raised lettering announcing Catherine Reynolds, CEO, Reynolds Agricultural Investments. He'd been studying it for the better part of an hour, remembering their conversation in her pristine kitchen. "We're looking to partner with family farms," she had explained, her enthusiasm genuine. "Not buy them out, preserve them, modernize without losing what makes them special." Her eyes had lit up as she spoke, reminding Tom of the way his father used to talk about the future of farming. "Would you be willing to show me your operation?" Now, 3 days later, Tom stood in his fields watching a sleek black SUV navigate the dusty road to his farm. Buddy had insisted on coming with Catherine, his head hanging out the window with unrestrained joy. The sight made Tom smile, despite his nervousness about what was to come. Catherine stepped out wearing boots. Not fashion boots, but practical ones, and jeans that somehow still managed to look elegant. She'd pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail, and there was genuine interest in her eyes as she surveyed the rolling wheat fields stretching to the horizon. "It's beautiful," she said simply, and something in Tom's chest tightened at the sincerity in her voice. Buddy bounded between them, clearly delighted to have both his humans in one place. "Been in the family since my grandfather's time," Tom said, leading them toward the main barn. He found himself sharing more than he'd intended, about the organic certification his father had fought for, about the heritage wheat varieties they'd preserved, about the challenges of competing with corporate farms while maintaining the principles that had guided 3 generations of Harrisons. Catherine listened intently, asking questions that revealed a deeper understanding of agriculture than Tom had expected. When they reached the broken combine, she didn't flinch at the rust or the oil stains, instead asking detailed questions about its capacity and maintenance history. "You're doing everything right," she said finally, sitting with Tom on the old wooden bench outside the barn where his father used to take his coffee breaks. "The problem isn't your farming, it's that you're trying to compete in a modern market with yesterday's tools." She pulled out a folder from her bag, and Tom tensed, expecting another buyout offer like the ones he'd been fighting off for years. Instead, she laid out a different vision, a partnership that would provide capital for modernization while leaving the farm's management in his hands. "We're not looking to change what works," Catherine explained, her shoulder brushing his as. She pointed out details in the proposal. "We want to enhance it. Modern equipment, updated irrigation, better distribution channels, but with your expertise and values guiding every decision." Tom studied the documents, aware of both the lifeline they represented and the leap of faith they required. "Why me?" he asked finally. "There are bigger farms, more profitable operations." Catherine was quiet for a moment, watching Buddy chase butterflies in the afternoon sun. "When I saw how you cared for Buddy, taking him to the vet despite your own financial struggles, refusing any reward, I recognized something rare: integrity, the same integrity I see in how you run this farm." She turned to meet his eyes. "That's what we want to invest in, Mr. Harrison. Not just the land or the crops, but the values behind them." "Tom," he corrected softly. "Mr. Harrison was my father." She smiled, and for a moment the business proposal between them seemed less important than the way the sunlight caught her eyes. "Tom, then, will you at least consider it?" Buddy chose that moment to return, dropping a well-worn tennis ball at their feet. The dog looked between them expectantly, tail wagging, as if he knew he was witnessing something important. "I'll need time," Tom said finally, "to think it through, talk to my lawyer." Catherine nodded, understanding in her expression. "Of course." She stood, brushing off her jeans. "But don't take too long. Sometimes the best opportunities are the ones that feel a little bit like fate." She glanced at Buddy, then back at Tom with a smile that suggested she wasn't just talking about business anymore. The sound of jet engines wasn't something you heard over Harrison Farm until that Wednesday morning. Tom was checking the south field when the sleek aircraft appeared, impossibly low, banking gracefully before setting down in the fallow field he'd been meaning to replant. Buddy, who'd been staying at the farm more often than not lately, barked excitedly and took off running toward the jet. Old Jim Wheeler pulled up in his pickup truck moments later, dust billowing behind him. "Tom, you seeing this?" He gestured wildly at the private jet now parked at the edge of the property. "That's one of them Gulf Streams, worth more than both our farms put together." The jet's door opened, revealing Catherine in a business suit that probably cost more than Tom's monthly expenses. Yet she navigated the uneven ground with surprising grace, pausing only to greet an ecstatic Buddy before walking toward them. Behind her, a small team of people emerged carrying laptops and briefcases. "I hope you don't mind the dramatic entrance," she called out, smiling. The airstrip in Miller's Creek was booked, and I wanted to show the team your operation firsthand." She reached them, extending her hand to Jim. "Catherine Reynolds, you must be Mr. Wheeler. Tom's mentioned what a help you've been with equipment repairs." Jim's weathered face registered shock at being known, but he recovered quickly, shooting Tom a look that clearly said they'd be talking about this later. "Ma'am," he managed, tipping his hat before making a tactical retreat to his truck. "You could have called," Tom said, fighting to keep his voice even as curious neighbors began appearing along the fence line. "Nothing stayed private long in farming communities. Would you have prepared everything exactly as it is?" Catherine asked shrewdly. "I wanted them to see the real potential, not a dressed-up version." She gestured to her team, who were already setting up equipment under a pop-up canopy. "These are our agricultural specialists. They're here to assess how we can best support your operation while maintaining its integrity." Tom watched as modern surveying equipment was deployed across his fields, feeling both hope and trepidation. "This is moving awful fast." Catherine's expression softened. "Time isn't on our side, Tom. I've seen your books. You've got, 3 months before the bank starts proceedings? We can help, but we need to move quickly." She was right, of course. The stack of final notices on his kitchen table proved that. But standing there, watching expensive equipment being set up on land his grandfather had worked with nothing but horses and determination, Tom felt the weight of 3 generations on his shoulders. "Your father's legacy isn't just in the soil," Catherine said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "It's in the values he taught you. Let us help you preserve both." Buddy sat between them, looking up with those knowing eyes that had started this whole unlikely connection. More trucks were pulling up along the road now. The Richardson family from the next farm over, the Collins boys who helped during harvest, even Martha from the diner. The arrival of a private jet had turned into an impromptu community gathering. "Mrs. Collins brought coffee and donuts," someone called out. Catherine's team looked up in surprise as the community began setting up their own impromptu welcome, folding tables appearing from truck beds, thermoses being passed around. "They're protective of this place too," Tom explained, watching Catherine take in the scene. "Been here through every drought, every storm, every hard season." Catherine's eyes met his, understanding dawning. "Then they should be part of this discussion. Your community's support is as valuable as any modern equipment we could provide." She turned to her team, calling out new instructions. "Set up the presentations on the tables there. Let's make this a proper community meeting." As the morning unfolded, something unexpected happened. Catherine's corporate team found themselves drawn into conversations with 4th-generation farmers about soil composition and weather patterns. Martha's donuts disappeared as quickly as the sophisticated agricultural surveys were shared, and Tom watched as 2 worlds he thought could never mix began finding common ground on his family's land. "This could work," he said finally, more to himself than to Catherine, who had stayed close to his side throughout the morning. She smiled, her shoulder brushing his. "It already is." Late that night, after the jet had departed and the last curious neighbor had gone home, Tom sat in his father's old leather chair, the family Bible open on his lap. The worn leather cover bore the fingerprints of 3 generations of Harrisons, each facing their own moments of decision, their own crossroads. Buddy lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to offer a sympathetic whine. The dog had refused to leave with Catherine, as if sensing Tom needed companionship on this night of contemplation. Outside, a quarter moon cast silver light across fields that had been in his family longer than Tom had been alive. The contract Catherine had left behind sat on the coffee table, its professional typography a stark contrast to the ancient Bible's worn pages. Tom found himself turning to the Book of Ruth, his father's favorite passage about faith and new beginnings. The old man had read it often during drought years, finding comfort in its messages about loyalty and redemption. "What would you do, Dad?" Tom whispered, running his fingers over the margins where his father had penciled in notes over the years. One caught his eye, Sometimes God's greatest gifts come disguised as our greatest challenges. The memory of that morning's events played through his mind. He'd expected Catherine's corporate team to see only the farm's flaws, the aging equipment, the outdated irrigation system, the modest yield compared to industrial operations. Instead, they'd recognized its potential, speaking with excitement about the heritage wheat strains his father had preserved, the organic certification that was becoming increasingly valuable, the sustainable practices that were decades ahead of their time. But it was Catherine herself who had surprised him most. She'd moved through the crowd of farmers with genuine interest, not the condescension he'd feared. She'd listened to old Jim Wheeler's rambling stories about the drought of '83, drawn Martha from the diner into a detailed discussion about local crop prices, and somehow managed to make everyone feel heard and valued. Tom stood, walking to the window where moonlight silvered the wheat fields. The proposal didn't involve selling the farm. He'd maintain control, make the decisions. The Reynolds investment would provide the means to modernize, to compete, to preserve what mattered while adapting to changing times. A Harrison never gives up, his father used to say. But maybe, Tom thought, accepting help wasn't giving up. Maybe it was finding a new way to keep fighting. He picked up his phone, looking at the last text Catherine had sent before boarding her jet. "Whatever you decide, I believe in what you're doing there, and so does Buddy." Attached was a photo of the dog sitting proudly in the farm's south field, golden fur backlit by the setting sun. The decision crystallized slowly, like morning dew gathering on wheat stalks. His father had taught him to be a steward of the land, not just its owner. If this partnership could preserve the farm's legacy while securing its future, wouldn't that be the truest way to honor his father's memory? Tom opened the drawer of his father's desk, pulling out the old man's favorite pen, the one he'd used to sign Tom's college acceptance letter, the equipment loans, the organic certification papers. Its weight felt right in his hand as he reached for the contract. Buddy stood tail wagging, as if sensing the moment's importance. Outside, a warm breeze rustled through the wheat fields, carrying the familiar scent of earth and growing things. Tom thought of Catherine's words about integrity, about preserving what mattered while embracing change. "Well, boy," he said to Buddy, who pressed against his leg supportively, "guess we're about to start a new chapter in the Harrison farm story." He reached for his phone, composing a message to Catherine with careful thought. "If the offer still stands, I'd like to move forward. Not just for the farm's sake, but because I believe we could build something important here. Something that honors the past while growing toward the future." As he pressed send, Tom felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The farm had always been his anchor, his responsibility, his burden. But now, for the first time, it felt like something else too. A bridge between worlds, a chance at something new. Buddy barked once softly, as if in approval. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork, meetings and plans. But tonight, in the quiet of his father's study, Tom Harrison had chosen not just a business partner, but a new path forward. One that felt somehow like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. The arrival of the new equipment catalogue coincided with the first frost of autumn, its glossy pages spread across Tom's kitchen table like a map to the future. Catherine sat beside him, her reading glasses perched on her nose, as they discussed which upgrades would have the most immediate impact. "The irrigation system first," Tom said, pointing to a state-of-the-art setup that he'd only dreamed about before. "We're losing too much water with the current layout, and the south field needs better coverage." Catherine nodded, making notes in her elegant handwriting. She'd been driving out to the farm 3 times a week now, forgoing the private jet for a more practical SUV. Her corporate suits had given way to comfortable jeans and work shirts, though she somehow managed to make even casual clothes look sophisticated. "What about the combine?" she asked, turning to the page he'd dog-eared. "The maintenance costs on the old one must be eating into your profits." "True," Tom admitted, "but harvest is still months away." The irrigation can't wait. He caught himself, adding, "If you agree, that is." Catherine's hand covered his briefly. "This is your farm, Tom. I trust your judgment." The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, sending warmth through his weathered fingers. Buddy, who now split his time evenly between the farm and Catherine's home, dozed contentedly under the table. His presence had become such a natural part of their meetings that neither of them questioned it anymore. The transformation began the following week. Modern irrigation pipes arrived on trucks that struggled down the farm's dirt road. A team of workers began the installation, while Tom and Catherine walked the fields, plotting out the most efficient layout. She surprised him with her practical knowledge, asking intelligent questions about soil composition and drainage patterns. "My grandfather was a farmer," she explained when he commented on it. "In Iowa. I spent summers there as a girl." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "He lost the farm during the 80s crisis. That's partly why this matters so much to me, helping preserve what he couldn't." The revelation shifted something in Tom's understanding of her. She wasn't just a CEO looking for a good investment. She was honoring her own connection to the land. As autumn deepened, the farm began to change. The new irrigation system gleamed in the morning sun. Software monitors tracked soil moisture with precision that would have seemed like science fiction to Tom's grandfather. But the heart of the place, the things that mattered most, remained unchanged. Catherine noticed this too. "You've managed to modernize without losing the soul of the place," she said one evening as they reviewed progress reports on the porch. The sunset painted the wheat fields gold, a sight that never grew old, no matter how many times Tom witnessed it. "That was the goal," he replied, watching her profile in the fading light. "Progress without forgetting who we are." She turned to meet his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. But before either could acknowledge it, Buddy interrupted with a playful bark, dropping his ball at their feet. The changes weren't just physical. Tom found himself looking forward to Catherine's visits, not just for the business discussions, but for the quiet moments between decisions. The way she listened to his stories about the farm's history, how she'd brought coffee from that fancy shop in the city, only to admit she preferred the simple brew from his old coffee maker. One morning, she arrived early to find Tom already working in the field, testing the new irrigation controls. She walked out to meet him, carrying 2 travel mugs of his coffee, her boots already dusty from the path. "I had a thought," she said, handing him a mug. "The heritage wheat varieties your father preserved. There's a growing market for authentic, historically significant grains. We could develop a premium line, tell the story of this place." Tom listened, watching how animated she became, talking about the farm's potential. The corporate executive was still there in her precise analysis, but now it was blended with genuine passion for the land and its legacy. "Could work," he agreed, sipping the coffee. "Dad always said these old strains had something special." "He was right about a lot of things," Catherine said softly, her eyes meeting his. The morning sun caught the auburn highlights in her hair, and Tom found himself wondering if his father had somehow known that the farm's future would arrive in ways none of them could have predicted. Buddy romped through the wheat, chasing meadowlarks and living in the joyful present, while his humans stood contemplating a future that seemed brighter with each passing day. The handwritten recipe card was spotted with butter stains and dusted with flour, Catherine's first attempt at Tom's mother's famous biscuits. She stood in his kitchen, her designer watch carefully set aside, hands deep in dough as Tom tried not to smile at her intense concentration. "The secret," he said, moving behind her, "is to not overwork it." His hands covered hers, showing her the gentle folding motion his mother had taught him years ago. Catherine leaned back slightly, fitting naturally into the space between his arms, and for a moment neither of them pretended it was just about the biscuits. "My chef would be horrified," she laughed softly, turning her head to look up at him. "Me cooking in a farmhouse kitchen. Horrified or jealous?" Tom's voice was warm with amusement. Buddy watched hopefully from his spot by the old wood stove, nose twitching at the promise of fresh-baked goods. It had become their Sunday tradition, Catherine driving out early, bringing fancy coffee beans that she let Tom brew in his ancient percolator because it tastes better here. She'd started asking about his mother's recipes, not out of mere politeness, but with genuine interest in the farm's culinary heritage. The biscuits came out slightly lopsided but golden brown, filling the kitchen with a homey scent that stirred memories of Tom's childhood. Catherine's proud smile as she pulled them from the oven made any imperfections irrelevant. "Not bad for a city girl," she said, breaking one open to release a cloud of steam. The morning sun, streaming through the windows, caught the flour in her hair, making it shimmer like frost on wheat. "Not bad at all," Tom agreed, though he wasn't just talking about the biscuits. He'd noticed how naturally Catherine had begun to fit into his world, how she'd started keeping spare boots in her car for unexpected farm walks, the way she'd learned to read weather patterns in the sky, anticipating rain hours before the forecast. They took their breakfast to the porch, a habit they'd fallen into without discussion. Buddy settled between their rocking chairs, accepting occasional bites with regal grace. The autumn air was crisp with wood smoke from neighboring farms, and the newly installed irrigation system cast rainbow prisms where morning sun caught its spray. "The processing plant called," Catherine mentioned, spreading honey on a warm biscuit. "They're excited about the Heritage Wheat program. Said it could revolutionize their artisanal bread line." Tom nodded, but his attention was caught by the simple domesticity of the moment. Catherine, in his mother's old apron, sharing breakfast on his porch, talking about their future plans as if they'd been doing this forever. "What?" she asked, catching his thoughtful look, just thinking about how different things were a few months ago, before a certain golden retriever decided to play matchmaker. Buddy's tail thumped against the porch boards at the mention of his role in their story. Catherine reached down to scratch his ears, her expression softening. "He's always been good at reading people," she said. "Better than I am sometimes. After David, my ex-husband, I threw myself into work. Buddy was the only one who could get me to slow down, to remember there's more to life than quarterly reports." It was the first time she'd mentioned her previous marriage. Tom let the silence rest comfortably between them, understanding the trust in her words. "The farm does that too," he offered. "Reminds you what matters. You can't rush the wheat growing or hurry the seasons along. Some things take the time they take." Catherine's hand found his on the armrest between them, her fingers intertwining, with his work-roughened ones. "Like getting to know someone properly." "Exactly like that." Tom squeezed her hand gently, marveling at how natural it felt. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the fields. The morning dew burned off the wheat, rising in a fine mist that made the world seem soft and full of possibility. From somewhere in the distance came the sound of the seasonal workers singing as they checked the new irrigation lines. "I should get these reports done," Catherine said eventually, though she made no move to leave. The corporate world seemed far away from this porch, these moments. "They'll keep," Tom replied, pouring her another cup of coffee. Her surprised smile told him she was still getting used to this, to slowing down, to letting life unfold at its own pace, to finding joy in simple things like homemade biscuits and quiet Sunday mornings. Buddy sighed contentedly between them, a sound that seemed to say he'd known all along where this path would lead. The local newspaper sat folded on Tom's desk, its headlines stark against the morning light. "Modern meets traditional, Harrison Farm leads agricultural revolution." But Tom barely saw the words through his worry. The new irrigation system, their proud first step toward modernization, had malfunctioned overnight. 3 sections of the South Field were already showing signs of stress, and the wheat was at a crucial stage of development. "The technician can't get here until tomorrow," he told Catherine over the phone, his voice tight with concern. The morning sun was barely up, but she'd answered on the first ring. "We could lose a significant portion of the crop if we can't get water to those sections today." "I'm on my way," she said without hesitation. 20 minutes later, her SUV was kicking up dust on the access road, Buddy's golden head visible in the passenger seat. She'd dressed for work, not the office, but real work. Heavy boots, worn jeans, and one of Tom's old flannel shirts she'd claimed weeks ago. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her expression held the same determination he'd seen in board meetings. "Show me," she said simply. They walked the affected sections together, Buddy trailing behind them as Tom explained the problem. The computer system that regulated water flow had crashed, and the manual override was proving temperamental. Catherine listened intently, occasionally crouching to examine connections and asking surprisingly technical questions. "You know about irrigation systems?" Tom asked, watching her inspect a control panel. "I did my homework after we installed this," she admitted. "Spent evenings studying the technical manuals. I wanted to understand what we were investing in." She straightened up, brushing dirt from her knees. "And my grandfather taught me that you never invest in something you don't understand." Old Jim Wheeler arrived uninvited but welcome, having heard about the trouble through the rural grapevine. He watched with undisguised interest as Catherine, the CEO who had arrived in a private jet months ago, knelt in the dirt beside him to examine. "Pipe connections. Reminds me of the drought of '95, Jim mused, sharing his coffee thermos with them. Tom's father rigged up a temporary system using old fire hoses and prayer. He glanced at Catherine. "Sometimes the old ways can help when the new ones fail." Something sparked in Catherine's eyes. "The old reservoir system," she said suddenly, turning to Tom. "It's still in place, isn't it, underground?" "Yeah, but it hasn't been used in years. Dad's old network of pipes and manual pumps." He stopped, seeing where she was going. "You think we could bypass the computer system entirely," she finished. "Use the old infrastructure to keep the critical sections watered until the technician arrives." They worked through the morning heat, Catherine and Tom side by side, with Jim offering guidance from his decades of experience. Local farmers who'd read about Harrison Farm's modernization in the paper stopped by, curious to see the fancy new system, only to find themselves recruited into an impromptu work crew. Catherine coordinated the effort with the same efficiency. She brought to corporate boardrooms, but here it was tempered with humility and genuine respect for the farmer's expertise. She asked questions, listened to suggestions, and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. By mid-afternoon, water was flowing through Tom's grandfather's old pipes, saving the vulnerable wheat while they waited for modern technology to catch up. The sight of clear water reaching the thirsty crops felt like watching a miracle unfold. "You know what this means?" Catherine said, standing with Tom at the edge of the rescued field. Her face was smudged with dirt, and her borrowed shirt was soaked with sweat, but her eyes were bright with revelation. "We don't have to choose between old and new. We can have both. A backup system using the old infrastructure alongside the modern equipment." Tom looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the successful businesswoman or the woman he was falling in love with, but someone who truly understood what he'd been trying to preserve all along. It wasn't just about the crops or the profit margins. It was about honoring the past while building the future. "The best of both worlds," he said softly, reaching for her hand. She squeezed his fingers, dirty and tired and completely present in the moment. Buddy flopped down at their feet, equally exhausted from his supervisory duties. The evening paper would later run a follow-up story about how Harrison Farm had faced its first crisis, but the real story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the way old and new had come together, in the strength found in combining tradition with innovation, and in the deeper understanding that had grown between a farmer and a CEO who had both learned to see beyond their own worlds. The invitation to the annual Agricultural Innovation Gala lay on Tom's kitchen table, its gold lettering catching the afternoon light. "Black tie required," it stated firmly, making Tom tug unconsciously at his worn collar. Catherine had insisted he attend as her guest, not just as a business partner, and now he stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting a bow tie that felt more constrictive than a hay baler's belt. "You look very distinguished," Catherine had assured him earlier that week during his fitting at the city's finest tailor. The suit cost more than his monthly fuel budget, but she'd insisted it was an investment. Besides, she'd added with a smile, wait until they taste the bread made from your heritage wheat. They won't be looking at your suit. Now, as their car approached the gleaming hotel in the heart of the city, Tom felt every bit the fish out of water. Catherine sat beside him, radiant in an elegant emerald gown that somehow reminded him of summer wheat fields. She must have sensed his nervousness because her hand found his, squeezing gently. "Just be yourself," she whispered. "That's who I—" She paused, catching herself. "That's who they need to meet." The ballroom stretched out like something from a different century, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow reflections across marble floors. Tom recognized faces from magazine covers and newspaper articles, CEOs, politicians, old money families who controlled half the state's agriculture. "Catherine, darling," a silver-haired woman approached, jewelry glinting, "and this must be your investment." The pause was slight but deliberate. "This is Tom Harrison," Catherine replied, her tone carrying a hint of steel beneath its polish. "He's revolutionizing sustainable wheat farming, and," she added, her hand slipping into his, "he's my date." The woman's perfectly maintained eyebrows rose slightly, but before she could respond, servers began circulating with appetizers, including small toast points topped with pâté. "The bread," Tom heard someone murmur. "It's extraordinary." Harrison. "Heritage wheat," Catherine announced proudly. "A preserved strain that dates back to the 1890s. Tom's family has been its steward for 3 generations. Suddenly, Tom found himself the center of attention for a different reason. Agricultural scientists wanted to discuss his preservation techniques. Artisanal bakers pressed business cards into his hands. A restaurant owner offered to feature the farm's story on his farm-to-table menu. "Tell us about the sustainable irrigation system," someone asked, and Tom felt himself on firmer ground. He explained their hybrid approach, combining traditional methods with modern technology, watching understanding dawn in eyes that had initially dismissed him. Catherine stayed close but not hovering, letting him find his footing. He caught glimpses of her throughout the evening, commanding respect from corporate titans, deftly navigating social politics, yet always aware of his presence in the room. When their eyes met across the crowd, her smile was full of pride and something deeper. The evening's turning point came during dinner, when an elderly gentleman at their table mentioned farming in Iowa during the 1980s crisis. "Lost everything," he said quietly. "Had to sell the family farm." "My grandfather too," Catherine replied, her hand finding Tom's under the table. "Near Cedar Rapids." The conversation shifted, becoming more personal, more real. Tom shared stories about his father's organic certification fight, about communities supporting each other through drought years. Soon, their table felt less like a formal gala and more like a gathering of people connected by their understanding of the land. When the orchestra began playing, Catherine led Tom to the dance floor. He'd worried about this moment, but as they moved together, he realized it wasn't so different from the evening they'd spent swaying to the radio in his kitchen while waiting for biscuits to bake. "You're a natural," she murmured, following his lead. "Had a good teacher," he replied, remembering their practice sessions on his porch. Though Buddy was a better dancer, her laugh, genuine and warm, drew glances from nearby couples. In her eyes, Tom saw not the powerful CEO or the wealthy socialite, but simply Catherine, the woman who could kneel in the dirt to fix irrigation pipes and command a boardroom with equal grace. "They're all talking about you," she said softly, "the farmer who's bridging the gap between traditional wisdom and modern innovation." "They're talking about us," he corrected gently, "what we're building together." As they danced beneath the crystal chandeliers, Tom realized he no longer felt out of place, like his heritage wheat finding new life in gourmet kitchens, like his grandfather's irrigation system working alongside computer controls. He had found his way to belong in both. worlds, not by changing who he was, but by being exactly who he'd always been. The weather warning came through just after midnight. Severe thunderstorms with possible tornado activity moving toward Harrison Farm. Tom stood on his porch watching lightning illuminate the western sky in violent bursts. His phone pressed. And to his ear, "I'm coming out there," Catherine said, her voice firm against the rising wind. "Catherine, no. The roads aren't safe." A crack of thunder interrupted him. "I'm already on my way." Buddy wouldn't settle down like he knew something. "Was wrong. We're almost at the turnoff." Before Tom could argue further, headlights cut through the darkness of his drive. Catherine's SUV appeared, Buddy already leaping out before she'd fully stopped. The dog ran to Tom, then turned to face the approaching storm, hackles raised. "The wheat," Catherine started, joining them on the porch. "We've got maybe an hour before it hits," Tom finished. They'd grown used to completing each other's thoughts. "The South feels most vulnerable. If those winds are as bad as they're saying, we can save it." Her hand found his in the dark. "Tell me what to do." They worked with desperate efficiency, securing loose equipment and reinforcing the temporary wind barriers around the most vulnerable sections of wheat. The emergency alert system blared warnings from both their phones as the storm drew closer, its approach marked by an eerie green tinge to the roiling clouds. Other trucks began arriving. Jim Wheeler, the Collins boys, neighbors who'd seen the warnings and known where help would be needed. They moved like a well-choreographed team, years of farming experience meeting Catherine's organizational skills. Just like the irrigation crisis, she called over the wind, helping Tom secure tarps over the new seedling beds. Old methods and a new working together. The first real blast of wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Tom caught her, pulling her close as debris whipped past them. Buddy barked a warning from the porch, where they'd insisted he stay, his voice barely audible over the storm's growing fury. "We need to get inside," Tom shouted, seeing the distinctive cloud formation that every farmer's child learns to fear. "Everyone inside now!" They ran for the house, helping the others ahead of them. The wind threw rain and small bits of ice horizontal, stinging their faces. Just as they reached the porch steps, a terrible cracking sound split the air. Tom turned to see the old oak tree, the one his father had hung his swing from, the one that had watched over 3 generations of Harrisons, beginning to topple. Toward the house, without thinking, he pushed Catherine forward, toward safety. "Tom!" Her scream cut through the storm's rage as the massive trunk began its fall. But the old tree had one last gift to give the Harrison family. Its branches, heavy, with years of growth, caught on the new support poles they'd installed for the weather monitoring equipment. The modern steel posts groaned but held, giving them the crucial seconds needed to clear the porch. They huddled in the basement with the others, listening to the storm's fury above. Buddy pressed against them both, offering comfort as they sat. In the dim light of emergency lanterns, Catherine's hand hadn't left Tom's since they'd reached safety. "I couldn't leave you out here alone," she said softly, her head resting on his shoulder. "Not with this coming." Tom turned to look at her, really look at her. Her hair was wild from the wind, her expensive clothes soaked and muddy, and she'd never been more beautiful to him than in that moment. This woman who could command boardrooms had rushed into danger just to stand beside him, to protect what he loved. "I love you," he said, the words rising as naturally as wheat after rain. "I think I have since Buddy first led you to my door." The storm raged overhead, but in the basement's shelter, Catherine's smile outshone the lightning. "I love you too," she whispered. "Every stubborn, honorable, hard-working inch of you." Their first kiss tasted of rain and promise, witnessed by friends who pretended not to watch, and a dog who finally relaxed his guard duty to wag his tail. Above them, the storm began to weaken, but something much stronger had been confirmed in its midst. When dawn finally broke, they emerged to survey the damage. The old oak lay across the yard, but it had missed both house and equipment. The wheat fields showed signs of battering but stood tall, bent but not broken, just like Tom's father always said. The new barriers had protected the vulnerable sections, while the heritage wheat's naturally stronger stalks had weathered the storm just as they had for generations. "We did it," Catherine said, standing in the morning light. "Together." Tom pulled her close, Buddy circling their legs joyfully. "Together," he agreed, knowing they were talking about much more than just surviving a storm. The old family photo album lay open between them on the porch swing, its pages worn soft with years of handling. The storm had passed days ago, leaving behind a freshly washed world, a new understanding between them. Tom's finger traced the edge of a faded photograph, his parents on their wedding day, standing proud in front of the farmhouse. "Mom died when I was 12, he said quietly, turning the page. "Dad never remarried. Said he'd already had his one great love." The next photo showed a young Tom on his father's shoulders, both grinning at the camera. "He poured everything into the farm after that, teaching me everything he knew. Like he was racing against time." Catherine leaned closer, her shoulder warm. Against his. Buddy dozed at their feet, occasionally twitching in his sleep. "When did you lose him?" 5 years ago. Heart attack, right out there in the south field." Tom's voice roughened. "Found him at sunset, still holding his notebook where he'd been recording crop data." Catherine's hand found his, fingers intertwining. The gesture gave him strength to continue. "The hospital bills took everything we'd saved. Then the drought hit and the bank started sending notices," and he shook his head. "Felt like I was letting him down, watching everything he'd built start to slip away." "But you didn't let it go," Catherine reminded him softly. "You kept fighting, like you did," he said, turning to meet her eyes. "After your grandfather lost his farm." Catherine was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I was 10 when it happened. Watching my grandfather stand there as they auctioned off everything, equipment, livestock, land that had been in the family for generations." Her free hand absently stroked Buddy's fur. "That's when I decided I'd find a way to protect family farms. I just took a longer route than I expected." She shifted, pulling something from her pocket, an old, creased photograph. "My first husband, David, never understood why I was so driven. He wanted a society wife, someone to host dinner parties and look decorative at charity events." A sad smile crossed her face. "The day I made CEO, he handed me divorce papers, said I'd chosen my career over our marriage." Tom studied the photo she'd shared, a young Catherine with her grandfather on his Iowa farm. Her smile bright and innocent. "You chose purpose over pretense," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." "Buddy helped me see that," she admitted. "After David left, I buried myself in work. Then this stubborn retriever came along, refusing to let me skip walks or work through weekends." She laughed softly. "He has a way of knowing what people need, even when they don't know themselves, like leading you to a struggling farmer's fence line." Tom's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Exactly like that." Catherine turned another page in the album, revealing more recent photos. Tom with his father in their organic certification ceremony, proud smiles as they held up the official documents. "Your father would be proud, you know, not just of saving the farm, but of finding a way to help other farmers too." Their heritage wheat program had expanded, offering hope to other family farms trying to compete in the modern market. The Harrison farm model of blending tradition with innovation was being studied by agricultural universities. "Sometimes I think he knew," Tom said thoughtfully. "He used to say everything happens in its season, that you can't force the harvest, just prepare the ground and trust in what grows." Catherine touched the latest photo in the album, taken just last week, showing them together at the farm's first Heritage Wheat Festival. Local families had gathered to celebrate the successful harvest, and someone had caught a moment of them laughing together, Buddy sitting regally between them. "We should add this one," she said, pulling out another photograph. It showed the three of them in the aftermath of the storm, muddy, exhausted, but triumphant. Jim Wheeler had snapped it at dawn, capturing the moment they emerged from the basement. "Into the fresh morning light." "Our first family photo," Tom observed, then felt Catherine go still beside him. He turned to face her fully. "That's what we are, isn't it? The three of us? Her eyes glistened as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "that's exactly what we are." Buddy chose that moment to wake, sensing the emotional undertone. He sat up, resting his head on their joined hands as if giving his approval. The evening light painted the wheat fields gold, a gentle breeze carrying the promise of summer. On the horizon, storm clouds had given way to clear skies, just as their shared pain had yielded to shared healing. "A family," Catherine repeated, letting her head rest on Tom's shoulder, growing something new from deep roots. The ring had belonged to Tom's mother, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light like morning dew on wheat. He'd found it in his father's desk drawer years ago, wrapped in a note that read, "For when you find your one great love, son." Now it sat in his pocket, warming against his heart as he waited for Catherine's regular Sunday morning visit. He'd planned everything carefully with Buddy as his willing conspirator. The dog had stayed at the farm overnight, helping Tom prepare for what might be the most important sunrise of his life. The morning was perfect, late summer warmth touching the wheat fields with gold, the kind of day that made you believe in possibilities. Catherine's SUV appeared right on schedule, but she stopped short as she reached the front gate. Tom had lined the drive with mason jars, each holding a floating candle still flickering in the dawn light. Buddy sat proudly at the end of the illuminated path, a sprig of wheat tied with ribbon to his collar. "What's all this?" Catherine called. Out, her smile mixing curiosity with growing understanding as she walked the candlelit path. She was wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her designer jeans, the perfect blend of their two worlds. "Thought we might take a walk," Tom said casually, though his heart was racing. "The wheat's perfect this morning." They followed their usual path through the fields, Buddy trotting ahead, as if he knew exactly where they were going. The morning dew soaked their boots, but neither minded. They'd learned to find beauty in these small moments of shared silence. Tom led them to the spot where they'd first met, the fence line where Buddy had appeared that rainy morning, setting everything in motion. He'd set up a small table there, laden with fresh coffee and his mother's biscuits, still warm from the oven. "You've been busy," Catherine said softly, touching the checkered tablecloth that rippled gently in the morning breeze. "Had some help." Tom nodded toward Buddy, who had assumed a dignified pose beside the table. "Though he's not much good at baking," Catherine laughed, but the sound caught in her throat as Tom took her hands in his. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and promise, much like that first day she'd arrived in her private jet, ready to change his world. "A few months ago, I thought I was about to lose everything," Tom began, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "The farm, my father's legacy, all of it. Then this remarkable dog led the most remarkable woman to my door." He squeezed her hands gently. "You came to save my farm, Catherine, but you ended up saving so much more." Buddy edged closer, his tail wagging slowly as Tom continued. "You showed me that preserving the past doesn't mean fearing the future. That love, like farming, is about having faith in what you plant and patience in what grows." Catherine's eyes glistened as Tom reached into his pocket, withdrawing the ring that carried generations of Harrison love. "My father told me once that a Harrison never gives up on what matters. You matter, Catherine, more than the farm, more than anything. You and me and this crazy dog who knew exactly what we needed." He lowered to one knee, morning dew soaking into his jeans, but he barely noticed. "I'm not offering you a perfect life. There'll be hard seasons and storms to weather, but I promise you harvests and sunrises, quiet moments and wild adventures, and a love as steady as the land we stand on." The ring caught the morning light, its simple beauty reflecting in Catherine's tears. "Catherine Reynolds, will you marry me? Will you help me grow old on this farm, raising wheat and memories and whatever else life plants in our path?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes!" as she pulled him to his feet and into her arms. Buddy barked joyfully, dancing around them as Tom slipped his mother's ring onto Catherine's finger. "It's perfect," she said, admiring how the modest diamond seemed to hold all the morning's light. like it was waiting for this moment. "Dad always said everything happens in its season," Tom replied, holding her close. "Guess this was ours." They sat at the little table, drinking coffee and sharing biscuits, making plans and dreams, while Buddy accepted treats from both of them. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the dew and warming the wheat fields that stretched out before them. Fields that would now nurture not just crops, but a future they would build together. "You know," Catherine said thoughtfully, "I think Buddy knew all along, right from that first rainy morning." The dog thumped his tail against the ground, looking altogether too pleased with himself. Whatever divine inspiration or simple instinct had led him to that fence line months ago, he'd succeeded in growing something far more precious than wheat, a love that, like the heritage grains they tended, would sustain generations to come. The wedding program, printed on paper made from their own wheat straw, read simply, "Today, two worlds become one." The September morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of day farmers pray for during harvest. The Harrison farmhouse had never looked more beautiful, strung with twinkling lights and decorated with wheaten garlands woven by local farm wives. Catherine stood in Tom's mother's old bedroom, now transformed into a bridal suite. Her wedding dress managed to be both elegant and farm-appropriate, ivory silk that caught the light like ripe wheat, with a hem practical enough for walking through fields. On the windowsill sat her CEO nameplate beside a jar of wildflowers, symbolizing the union of her two worlds. "Ready?" Martha from the diner asked, adjusting Catherine's simple veil. She'd become a surrogate mother figure to them both over the past year. "More than ready," Catherine replied, touching the locket at her throat that held photos of both their fathers. Through the window she could see guests arriving, corporate executives in designer suits mingling with farmers in their Sunday best, all finding common ground in celebration. Downstairs, Tom waited in his father's restored study, dressed in a suit that somehow looked both sophisticated and true to his farming roots. Buddy sat beside him, wearing a bow tie and taking his best man duties very seriously. The dog's coat had been brushed to a golden shine, but his eyes held the same loving wisdom that had first brought them together. "What do you think, boy?" Tom asked quietly. "Did you know it would turn out like this when you showed up that rainy morning?" Buddy's tail thumped against the floor in what seemed like definite agreement. The ceremony would take place in the south wheat field, where rows of white chairs formed an aisle between golden stalks. Jim Wheeler had helped design a special platform that wouldn't damage the crops, because your father would come back to haunt us if we trampled his heritage wheat, he'd joked. As the guests settled in, the contrast between their worlds dissolved into harmony. Catherine's corporate board members listened intently to old farmers sharing weather wisdom. City socialites earnestly discussed organic farming with local families. The Reynolds Agricultural Investment Team handed out programs alongside the Harrison farm workers. The wedding march was played on Tom's father's old guitar, accompanied by a string quartet Catherine's mother had insisted on. But when Buddy began his walk down the aisle as ring-bearer, carrying a small wheat-woven basket with their rings, all eyes turned to him. He performed his duty with dignified joy, taking his place beside Tom with obvious pride. Then Catherine appeared at the end of the aisle, and Tom forgot to breathe. She walked between rows of wheat that swayed gently in the breeze, her father's empty place filled by Jim Wheeler, who had tears in his eyes. The morning sun caught her veil like morning mist over the fields, and her smile outshone everything there. Vows were personal, combining Catherine's eloquence with Tom's straightforward sincerity. They spoke of growth and patience, of weathering storms together, of faith in what they'd planted. Tom promised to be her harbor in both boardroom battles and prairie winds. Catherine vowed to be his partner in all seasons, from corporate victories to challenging harvests. "Like this wheat," Tom said, gesturing to the heritage grains surrounding them. "Our love has deep roots and strong yields." "And like this farm," Catherine added, her voice carrying clear across the field, "it combines the best of tradition and innovation." past and future. When they kissed as husband and wife, the wheat fields seemed to ripple with approval. Buddy barked joyfully, setting off laughter and applause. The afternoon celebration brought together more than just two people. It united two ways of life, proving that neither had to diminish for the other to thrive. The reception tent glowed as evening approached, tables decorated with mason jar centerpieces holding wheat and wildflowers. The menu featured bread baked from their heritage wheat, alongside elegant dishes that would have been at home at any society wedding. Catherine's corporate friends found themselves learning folk dances from Tom's farming neighbors, while agricultural professors discussed sustainable practices with investment bankers. As the sun set, Tom and Catherine shared their first dance in the same spot where they'd first met, that fateful fence line now strung with lights. Buddy watched from nearby, his mission clearly accomplished, as his humans swayed together under the stars. "Happy," Tom whispered against Catherine's hair. "Complete," she answered, and in that word lay all the truth of their journey. From lost dog to found love, from struggling farm to thriving future, from separate worlds to shared destiny. 1 year later, the new sign at the entrance to the farm read, "Harrison Reynolds Family Farm," its fresh paint gleaming in the morning sun. The letters were carved from the wood of the old oak tree that had fallen during the storm, a fitting symbol of how they'd learned to make something new from what life had given them. Tom stood on the porch of the renovated farmhouse, coffee in hand, watching Catherine walk through the morning-misted wheat fields. She'd just finished a video call with her London office. These days, she ran her agricultural investment empire from what had once been his father's study, proving that modern business could thrive anywhere with the right technology. She still wore his old flannel shirts over her designer clothes, a blend of both their worlds that had become uniquely her own. Buddy dozed nearby, his golden coat showing touches of grey now, but his eyes still bright with joy. He wasn't alone anymore. 2 of his puppies played in the yard, the result of an unexpected romance with Jim Wheeler's retriever. They'd kept one pup and given the other to Martha from the diner, expanding their unconventional family even further. The Heritage Wheat program had exceeded all expectations. Their story, the struggling farmer, the corporate CEO, and the matchmaking dog, had captured people's imagination, but it was the quality of their grain that kept customers coming back. Artisanal bakeries across the country now proudly advertised Harrison Reynolds Heritage Wheat in their window displays. "The irrigation system's running perfectly," Catherine called as she climbed the porch steps. "The new software integration is actually working with your grandfather's old pipe network better than we'd hoped." She settled beside him on the porch, swing fitting naturally into the space under his arm. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise over their shared dream. The farm had become a model of sustainable agriculture, proving that family farms could thrive in the modern world without losing their soul. Agricultural students now visited regularly, learning how to blend traditional wisdom with innovative techniques. "Dad would have loved this," Tom said softly, looking out over the thriving fields. "Seeing the old ways and new ideas working together, just like us." Catherine squeezed his hand. "He sees it," she said, "through every farmer we help, every field we save, every tradition we preserve while building something new." Their latest project sat at the edge of the property, an agricultural education center built in the shape of an old barn but equipped with state-of-the-art technology. Here, they taught other farming families how to modernize without losing their heritage, how to compete in today's market while honoring yesterday's wisdom. "Speaking of building something new," Catherine said, a slight tremor in her voice, "I have some news." She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "We'll need to add another line to that sign soon. Harrison Reynolds Family Farm is about to get a little bigger." Tom's heart swelled as the meaning of her words sank in. Buddy, sensing the emotion of the moment, padded over to rest his head on Catherine's lap, his tail wagging gently. One of his puppies followed, adding its own excited energy to the scene. "A baby," Tom whispered, wonder in his voice. "Our own little harvest." "Due in spring," Catherine smiled, tears in her eyes. "Just in time for planting season." They held each other as the morning light strengthened, painting their world in shades of gold and promise. The wheat fields stretched out before them, heritage grains growing strong and true, just like the love that had transformed both their lives. Buddy barked softly, perhaps remembering that rainy morning when he'd first led Catherine to Tom's fence. Line. One simple act of kindness, a lost dog taken in, a heart opened, had grown into something far richer than either of them could have imagined. "Everything happens in its season," Tom said, echoing his father's wisdom as he held his wife. Close. In the distance, the first truck of the day kicked up dust on the road to their farm, bringing more people eager to learn their story, to understand how love, like wheat, grows best when tradition and innovation work together, when past and future blend into a fertile present. The morning sun climbed higher, blessing the land that had brought them together. In the end, it wasn't just about saving a farm or finding love. It was about discovering that the best harvests come from planting hope, nurturing dreams, and believing that sometimes the most precious things grow from the most unexpected seeds.